אכלנו משלו וטובו חיינו, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ברוך אתה אדוני הזן את הכל. בעצת הנפתי טריבמתם תתינה וקמתן את נקמתם סעתי שגרבים לבני עתים תווים ידברים רשעים לצדיק
Keravan isim.
בכל כלה בחיים משל ובכל טוב מכל טוב העולם יחסר
Do you have a lab of some kind? That's it. That doesn't get any light. You don't have like anything that hangs over. No? Nothing? If only this thing works.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
I could just give her my phone and use it.
All right, so maybe just bring that over. Is it difficult to bring over?
No,
at least to the
no,
lab.
it takes a moment.
Okay, at least to the lab.
Yeah.
Is there a possibility I can get inside of this? That's great. That does a lot. It's a small place. They said.
Okay, so if it's going to take,
That
it's
makes
going to take
sense.
more than 30 seconds now. Yes. It's very dark. You just plug it in here. Plug it in. You just lights, I could see something. How big it helps. I think that's important. Yeah,
Doesn't really help.
helps very well. No, it's fine. We'll have to manage with what we've got.
Is that a turn on?
Fortunately not.
What's that?
Trade shares would be more illumination right here.
Is it?
Yeah, it's true because that one is.
Oh, yeah, so maybe if you don't mind.
Maybe it's like that chair.
No, sure.
How do you know it's small something? What is that from? Murky was a mechanic in U.S. Air Force.
No, you felt. Yeah, so I tried it afterwards to see. Right, very clean.
Pass me that box. Yeah. Okay, you want to sit down here, Moshe? Freilich Chanukah, everybody. Chanukah Sameach, Tov Shinai Vav. We're privileged to have some very special guests. And JJ is here for that. My goodness. Dr. Dror is back with us. We haven't had another surprise guest of the evening. For all of those of you who've been here for 40 years or more, is Ricky Khan's mother. Look at this all the way from Brazil. What an amazing, amazing, wonderful woman. A lot of people that know and love Ricky, so it is perfect. So we're gathered tonight over here in Moshe Foreman's beautiful home in Rechavia, or is it, it's not clear whether it's Rechavia or Shari Chesed, on the border. And being as this is his Chanuka Bayit, he's made quite a spread over here. And I have a special gift for his, well, it's for himself, more than the Chanuka Bayit. Moshe is a person who tries to fit into every day 6 or 7 different days. This is a very, very difficult kind of thing to do. He usually loses track of one thing or another that he's supposed to be doing. And I decided that there's only one thing in the world that would be usable for him, and it's something that actually it was made available by my very good friend, Professor.
A very good friend.
Mechanical, yeah. It's Professor Mechanical, yes, directly from Hogwarts. And we have the one and only thing that could possibly help Moshe. We'll open it very carefully.
He's going to try to open it without tearing the paper. Rip it up, tear it up.
An authentic time turner. And that should help once and for all.
Probably big into himself. Probably big into himself like every single day.
I think if you start wearing that around your neck, it will at least remind you that days have to be counted one by one. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Anyway, so we're actually gathered here for the Parsha review on Parshat Vayeshev Tafshinayim Vav, but because so many of the Inyanim were Chanuka oriented, as is always the case with Parshat Vayeshev, so we decided to make it a little bit more Chanuka oriented tonight. Very special. We should show them, the kind of stuff they have here in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, come on. This is nothing. Give me the other one.
We have another box of 20.
Anybody is interested. So these are absolutely the very best Roladin. What do they call these? Sufganiya. What do they call them in English? Only Sufganiya. Nobody ever sees stuff like this anywhere else. I don't think. It's really beautiful stuff. תעזרו למשה, צריך עזרה באכילת הסופגניות.
אני מאוד אשמח אם תאכל גם.
Don't forget, at some point or another, you're going to have to put the ice cream away.
No,
So we started off by being maskers, by being masker the time of the year, as we usually do. And this is the time of the year which basically takes us to the darkest days, the longest nights, as anybody who's been waking up for lates may have noticed. Anybody who makes his mincha has to make mincha in time in the middle of the afternoon. And the Gemara tells us that this time goes all the way back as a special time, all the way back in the very first week. Yes, Elam, after Adam Arishon leaves Gan Eden. After Adam Arishon leaves Gan Eden, and when he first meets these days that become darker and darker, he decides that this must be the meaning of the death that was nigzar on him. He feels that the entire world is basically losing its light, going into a state of darkness. And after the change of the seasons, in which the days begin to get longer, and he realizes that it's not because of him, but that this is the way of the world, this is nature, he makes a celebration. And that celebration becomes, say Chazal, a very important part of the human condition. And it's a celebration. Basically, we know that the period of the darkness is a period that actually affects our minds. And there's seasonal affective disorder, which stands for sad, which is many of the events in this parasha are pretty sad. And the holiday that resulted became first the holiday of Avodah Zarah directly, turned into Roman Saturnalia, became the Christian Christmas, and of course is expressed in our Chanuka. And the clarity of Miketz coming up, which Chazal tells us is Ketz Sam Lachoshech, is that indeed the way in which we relate to this period, the way we relate to this parsha, is as darkness. The darkness that we only begin breaking out of in the beginning of next week's parsha. But that means that the sense that we have of the world going dark, that we have of the disorders of winter, are part of the human condition. In other words, if we bring them all the way back to the time of Adam Arishon, then that means that there's something that's very primal about the responsiveness to this period. And we need to, if that's the case, we need to understand why
it's 21 hours.
Couldn't be that late. So we'll fix it afterwards. Right, so we need to understand how the element of the humanity per se are so much part of the Nasa Adam. Why indeed? I mean, remember, we are in the middle of Sefer Bereshit. And Sefer Bereshit is essentially the Koach Ma'asav Higid La'amo. And it's the idea in which we end, at the very end of this parsha, we end with the Yaakov Uvanav Yodu Mitzrayim. We end with the beginning of the next part of the Haftacha to Avram Avinu, after he was promised that he was going to be given, indeed, the Koach Ma'asav, which leads to Tekla Nachalat Koyim, that it would be unfortunately involved with darkness. And that was Emar Chashecha Gidolah Nofelet Alav, which is Merumas, of course, in the actions of Ma'aseh Bereshit themselves, even before the B'riat Adam. So as Chazal tell us, Aretz Hayta Tov V'Vov Choshech Al Pnei Tom, this primal Choshech, specifically the Choshech is related to Chanukah's period, that's what's called Zeyavan. So that it's obvious that this is part not only of the human condition, post-creation, it's part of the reality of creation, the meaning of Koach Ma'asav, and that means that the same remez that we have over there, the Emech HaShecha Gedolah, is also the remez to the various stages in Ma'aseh Bereshit itself. And that means that the Chanuka stage, which is the last, except for one stage, and that's the penultimate geula that we have, is very much part of the meaning of what Adam experiences, and very much part of Vayeshev itself. And therefore, it's probably not coincidental that our parsha describes a descent into darkness, which indeed is the Miketz. That Ketz, say Chazal, Miketz is Ketz Sam Lachoshech. As we see, the idea of a year of the darkness is that basically nobody has any sense of what is happening. No one has any real understanding of what's going on. I couldn't believe it. I forgot to print out the notes. I won't be able to. Isn't that crazy? Is your printer working? I mean, I can get it off of the screen, but I'm afraid that then you won't be able to see. Hopefully it doesn't blacken it. Why, you know if it blacks out the camera?
Why would it?
I don't know.
No.
No? Okay, good. All right, fine. So I should be able to find things on here. It's a little bit difficult. And this is the version on here. One second, can I download it from the cloud, right? Yeah. Okay, 1 second. All right. Yeah, no, it's okay. All right. So basically, what the Medrash tells us is that everyone in this parsha is confused. They don't really understand what's happening. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what they're doing. And as HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "Ani yadati machshavotechem," I know the way you guys work, and I know what it is that you're doing. And you don't know what you're doing. And I'm the only one who knows what I'm doing. And that therefore, even though everyone's got his ideas, Yehuda is busy running around trying to find himself a business and a wife. And basically, Reuven is busy doing tshuva, and Yosef has got his own problems. Nobody really knows what's going on. And I'm busy too, says the Medrash. I'm so busy creating Oro Shel Mashiach, which nobody here is aware of. And this becomes an expression of Rabata Aliyah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is busy doing his thing, and indeed it culminates in a holiday of Or, which is for us the Gilui of the Aragonas of Chanuka. And interestingly enough, for the Goyim, it culminates in the sense of a renewal so profound that they make this their new year. And we pointed out in the past that Kabbalistically speaking, the tikkun of the issues that took place in the span of the Churban continue on through Hanukkah, which means that the aspects of Nechama is really, and the final din is really all the way on Hanukkah. And that's also even just from the name, because we basically go from the Bechia Shel Chinam period, which is all about Chinam, through the tikkun of Machaneh, and then that is, of course, Sukkot, and here we come to Hanukkah itself, all from this same idea of Chen, which is so deeply involved in Yosef. And as the Balei Kabbalah point out, the gematria of Matityahu is Rosh Hashanah. So that we're still really, even from a Jewish point of view, there are elements of New Year's that's associated with this time too. So that to them, the New Year is the time, interestingly enough, that the year begins to live again. Things start getting brighter. Now you can be beginning to imagine a spring that is coming. Remarkably, to us, the new year begins as the into dormancy. Now, this was really a machlokas in the Gemara about Batisha Nivrayla, Benisa Nivrayla. And in fact, as Tosfos points out, it's really the Hayom Harat Olam is in terms of Harat, is in terms of conception, literally. But that tells us something about the way that we're tofes, the nature of Bria. And that means that the way that we experience ourselves as humans growing in the Olam towards the Nasa Adam and the understanding of Adam's place requires us to understand that our sense of renewal specifically comes as the year goes into what we usually look at as dormants, where things are not going to be coming to life for quite a while. So that too must be significant in understanding the human condition. So it's true that it's a period of Choshech, but remember, as the Ramban points out very beautifully, Ramban gives a much deeper explanation of Ma'aseh Avot Siman Levanim, than we generally take it. We take it as more sort of a siman, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu compresses the history of Klal Yisrael into the Avos. But as the Ramban points out, it's more than that. And in fact, it's Merumas in the Haftarah that we choose for Vayeshev, which ends, that parsha ends with Ki lo yaseh Hashem Elokim davar ki im gilad sodola v'dav. Something about the need for the Gilui Sod, for its relationship with a human being in terms of what's happening. So the Ramban says, look, people read all of this. A lot of the stories, things that take place in the Chumash, seem to be a lot of extra, unnecessary things. Ein b'hem to'elet. They have no particular meaning. And, okay, what could it mean? So, as Ramban explains, he says, Ki kol gzerat irin, kasher tetzeh mikoach gzera el poal dimayon, tiyeh hagzera mitkayemet al kol panim. That is, the idea is that the concept, and we're going to see how central this is to understanding the parsha. It's not just an idea that happens to be part of the Vayeshev. Rather, the Ramban says, look, the idea is that what people view as a metaphor or something that presages history or gives you an insight into what's going to be in the future is much more than that. It's the actual way in which an idea takes on some concrete reality, which afterwards can flower into the fullness of whatever those events are related to. And he says you'll find in the most incredible way. Now, you see, every Navi is always doing something. So he's told to do something with it, do some kind of kula. At a point, and he brings the amazing story what you have with Elisha, that over there we find before Elisha dies, So you have Yehoash, who is the son of Yehoachaz, who is a terrible Rasha, Vayas, Hara b'nei Hashem lo sar mikol chatot Yeravam benevat asher echti et Yisrael. If you want to get a sense of what Rishonim are in those days, So Elisha was very ill. Chalat chal Yoash yamud bo. Yoash Melech Yisrael comes to visit Elisha, falls on his face and cries, Avi Avi Rechev Yisrael ufarashav. This is from the one who was Osar Mikol Chatot Yeravam, you understand. This is and he's totally tzibrochen. So Elisha says to him, Kach keshet v'chitzim. So he takes a bow and arrows. And then he says to Melech Yisrael, Harkiv yadcha lakeshet. Harkiv yado. Vayasem Elisha yadav ayad hamelech. So Elisha holds the hand above the Melech. He himself doesn't even have the kayak to be able to fire these arrows. Vayor p'tach hachalon kedma. Vayiftach. Vayomer Elisha yareh. Vayomar, so Elisha says, Chetz tishua la'Hashem, v'chetz tishua ba'aram, v'hikita at aram ba'ofek ad kaleh. Vayomer kach achitzim, v'ikach. Vayomer l'melech Yisrael hach arza, v'yak shalosh pa'amim v'yamod. V'yiktsof alav ish Elohim, vayomer. Lakot chamesh, shesh pa'amim. Az hikita at aram ad kaleh, atar shalosh pa'amim takeh at aram. It's absolutely crazy. Bond says, what's going on? Here's how many times you bang an arrow into the ground. It's ridiculous. This is, you see, ad kedei kach, that the extent of the concretization of the idea and the way in which it's capable of being translated into a reality is linked to those original meaningless, as you thought, meaningless maasim, in which that becomes the seed of the way in which an idea takes on reality. Of course, the truth is we see this all the time, even in history, in which just a small idea that is somehow or other, the coming to power of Hitler, for instance. It's ridiculous. People laugh their heads off. It's Meshuggah, it's a beer house nut. And the sense of the investing into whatever actions and word small little events that become something that takes on greater and greater power and mass as it goes along. And in the end, it seems to be almost something that was tapping into currents, profound currents in history and in the vision that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for Bria. So this is the way in which the Ramban understands all of these events. And that means that the Imgila Sodor is something that has everything to do with our Parsha, because our Parsha is so powerful that in the end we're going to see that it defines the Birchot Yaakov. Remember, he talks with each of the Shvatim in terms of the events that are here, and he sees these events as being related to the historic functionality of that Shevet, the leaders of that Shevet, the Miuchodim of that Shevet, and of course the Birchot Yaakov themselves are very much a definition of our future. To the extent, I mean, you have Yehuda going down to Adulam, so that becomes the Beit HaMikdash that's going to be built by Hurons, because it's related to the same person. How is it related to the same person? And that becomes now a shmita of a kilko in the very making of the Beit HaMikdash, because it involved Goyim in the building of the Beit HaMikdash. That's why in Ezra's time they worked so hard to prevent anybody having, so there's this Ad Adulam. It's really important to tell us that Ad Adulam, the Beit HaMikdash, is going to go down. It's amazing. So that that events between the Shvatim, which appear to be over here, simple family tensions. Those family tensions are translated into realities which affect the nature of Klal Yisrael to such an extent that we actually become two completely different countries based on the differences between Yehuda and Yosef mentioned here, such that we have the Malchut of Yosef and Yerovam, and this was exactly the Yoachaz we were talking about. And we have a completely different vision of reality, which is Yehuda's vision of reality, and the Beis HaMikdash, and Yerushalayim, and so on. All of this comes from these little events over here. The desire to affect the nature of the Malchus that is involved in the Mechira of Yosef becomes the Asara Harugei Malchut, specifically, in that it gave Koach to a completely different vision of Malchut, which was capable of the destruction of so much of the Torah and so much of the future. It ends up with the loss of both Batei HaMikdash because of the Aseret HaShvatim first, and then as the Navi and as our Kinas talk about it in terms of the interrelationship between those two and the metaphor that we have of the two women that they represent. And this becomes the Amikram, the Kesef Tzaddik that we have over here. The Mer Nevuchim, who points out that people think that it's, you wouldn't think to see this in the Rambam, right? The Rambam talks about, people don't understand that the relationships that Chazal speak of are meant to be taken very seriously. If you have to bring a Seir Izim in terms of Kapora, why? Because they were Mocher as Yosef for Seir Izim. So you think that, okay, yeah, Korean, nice homiletic, that's not the point at all. It's your entire connection to history, and your entire future is involved in your coming to understand those events, being metaking those events, and it affects the psychology and the psyche of every single person in Klal Yisrael to the end of time. So we were kovea korban like that. It means you've got to constantly be involved in dealing with the issue. And this, of course, becomes the first loss of Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, into Yeridat Mitzrayim, which is why the Vayeshev Yaakov, which is itself meaningful only in terms of this idea of the Ramban, because it wasn't much of a yeshiva. And in fact, when we talk about for Dorot, we talk about the Yaakov of Anav Yordu Mitzrayim as a result of Arami Oved Avi, we don't mention this parsha at all. It's like, okay, this was a modality in which Yaakov of Anav Yordu Mitzrayim. It was Natati Le'etzav et Har Seir L'Reshet Hatorah, and that's it. All this interruption of the Vayeshev in the context of a Vayeshev is remarkable because it is exactly what Ramban is talking about. It does indeed define a yeshiva, with all of the problems that will be involved in that first stage of yeshiva, and comes essentially to describe a millennia of our involvement in Eretz Yisrael and in our loss in Eretz Yisrael. So in terms of its expanded history, that's the way that we have to look at it. And so too are all of the things here, including that opening, Vayeshev Yaakov, are profoundly expressive of actual doing in ways that concretize concepts that become possibly deeply disturbing in history, but certainly very protean ways that we need to deal with and learn what they mean and how they are central in our becoming ourselves. And in that sense, we also find that this describes not only the way that we get into problems, but there's not another parsha that we could say is so completely intertwined with the creation of Geula. I mean, as we saw before, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was busy, Osek Baro Orash HaMashiach. As the Rishonim put it, we can't even begin Yeridat Mitzrayim, which is the first stage of Choshech that is shown to Avram Avinu in terms of the Ger Yezaracha, until we've already laid the foundations for the birth of Mashiach HaCharon. So that the story of Peretz here is the story basically of the Malchus to come. And we already have in place the presence, which of course the people that were there understood. And the Megillah that defines it lists the generations from Peretz. That's the David, Yishai. That starts, so we go directly from, Yehuda, Peretz, to David. And that's exactly what we're saying that they're that's exactly the case. So that what we have over here is the beginning of those sodot, and there's many, many remazim about it. I mean, even to the point where the Gemara in Chulin talks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yiktzif Eved al Adonav al Avdo. What is that? What's the relationship? Because of the fact that Yosef needed a Yeshua, HaKadosh Baruch Hu ended up getting Paro angry at the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Tabachim. Vice versa, we have the same thing. We had the Merida that turned out to be the only way that Haman loses out through the whole story of Vashti and Esther coming in order to provide ultimately for Mordechai. The Gemara puts those two together because both of them are seen as essentially the same over here. Do you have your Otzar Haggadah? You know what I mean?
So do you mind passing it? Actually, it's the one without a back.
So then we have even the stories that appear to be just, little events that are localized in terms of Sarah Mashkim, Sarah Ofim. According to the Gemara Chulin, those dreams encapsulate the entire history of what's going to be coming in terms of Klal Yisrael's future. So that each and every one of those funny things in the dream ends up being a message to Yosef besides the message to the Sarah Mashkim and the Sarah Ofim. It becomes a story within a story. So here's some of the sense of the power of the messages, or the sense that Chazal see the whole future being involved here. And we have so many different levels. I'm going to take 2 minutes to go through them, just so that you get a sense of the different approaches of the different Tanoim and how meaningful each thing was. So what is the Geffen, Shloshas Rigim, and so on. According to Rebbe Eliezer, the Geffen refers to creation itself from this world. Shloshas Rigim is Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Porachat al Tanitza is the Imahot. Yivshilo Eshkelot Anavim refers to the Shvatim. According to Rebbe Yoshua, but that would define what already is, says he. Why wouldn't these dreams be definitions of a future to come? And therefore, Gefra, Shloshas Rigim is Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Keporachat al Tanitza is Sanhedrin. If Shilash Klote Anavim goes through all of the Dorot with Tzadikim Shebechol Dor V'Dor, according to Rabbi Elazar Amodai, Gefen is Yerushalayim. The Shlosha Srigim refers to Migdash and Melech and Kohen Gadol. Keporachat al Tanitza refers to Pirchei Kahuna. If Shilash Klote Anavim refers to the Nesachim. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he learns Gefen and Torah Shlosha Srigim is the Matonis, the air, the Amud Anan, the Man. Keporachat al Tanitza is the first things, that's the Bikurim. If Shalosh Klote Anavim, Smod is also the Nesachim. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Gefen is Yisrael, Shlosh Srigim is the Shalosh Regolim. Keporachat al Tanitza is the time that it's Yigiaz Manosh Yisrael Lifrot V'Libot, which is the beginning of Bnei Yisrael Poro Vayishet V'Yirubu. Al Tanitza means it's the time for Geula. V'chenom Vayez Nitzcham Abgadai. Shilash, that's of course we reference to the Geula Achrona Yishayah. If Shilash Klote Anavim, Yigiaz Manosh Mitzrayim Lishtot Kosat Arila, and so on and so forth. We don't want to have 2 minutes. I told you, okay, with the 2 minutes. But you get a sense of the way that we're taking for granted that what Yosef was hearing at this moment was multi-leveled. On one level, he was talking to them, talking about their dream and the implications for their lives, but understood very clearly that what he is involved in is something that has implications for his whole vision of the future and his whole vision of Malchus itself. So that however you understand it, this weird background stage voice that keeps coming up throughout the Parsha, which is always the Twilight Zone kind of stuff, in which the dreams is the smallest part over here. You know, Yehuda has to say Tzatka, but the Mimeni, that's his off the stage voice, Mimeni. I arrange that to happen, you know. So, or we have this, the presence all of a sudden of Yaakov Avinu's Dukan in the window. You know, Yaakov is aware of his Dukan coming at the window. Oops. You know, and that, of course, also in terms of the whole future. You know, you're going to be with the rest of the Shvatim. You're going to be in the Big Day Kohen Gadol. You want to be erased from that? And then we have him walking through a field and suddenly meeting up with 3 malachim, because each time it says Ish, says the Bencher, it's another malach. So he recognizes that this is Gabriel, right? How do I know he recognizes? Because it's an idiotic conversation otherwise. You meet a guy, right, and you say, please just tell me where my brothers went. What are you talking about? Brothers? What brothers? You know, does he say, do you notice maybe 10 guys that bear some resemblance to me and have a lot of, nothing, not a word. Oh, tell me, please. No, I get a nully, please. That's all I want. Just tell me where they went. All right. It's a very weird kind of moment over there. I said that. As Rashi says, and so on. This just keeps going on, such that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is basically playing his dreams here throughout the entire story, and in which the Parsha brings out so powerfully how nobody figures out what's going on, to the extent that they make absolute idiots of themselves, because everything becomes Mida Keneged Mida. Everything that they say about Yosef is what happens to Yehuda. Every plan that Yehuda's got this plan, you know, well, we don't want to be Peniel of us. Don't let anybody know. Okay. So and I mean, again, we've done this so many times, I don't want to take up your time, but if you remember the old Shiurim, I mean, there's literally 30 different things in which plans backfire to be precisely the opposite of what you thought was going to happen. And that sense of the presence from the outside, even the story of Yehuda's interaction with Tamar, it's also another one of these strange malachim. Yehuda's going to look at a common prostitute. So he walks away, he walks by, doesn't pay any further attention. You know, but the malach said, excuse me, Yehuda, Where are we supposed to get Malachim from? Where are we supposed to get Nevi'im from? What the heck's wrong with you? Turn around. Okay. Shalom b'tovato, so to speak. And this sense of meta history begins right away at the beginning. So the Eretz Migurei Aviv, so the Medrash says this Migurei Aviv. If you take a look at the Gematria of Migurah, it turns out to be 259, which is precisely the number of years from the moment of Ger Yezaracha to this moment, which of course ties directly in with the Medrash at the beginning of the Parsha, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is getting nervous. How am I going to get them down to Mitzrayim? What do I want to do? I want to take them down in Shashalot Shal Barzel, So a marshal, it's like a farmer is trying to get the parot into the corral. They're not interested in coming. They have a good time out there in the field. So the best way to do it, there's a beautiful story in James Herriot, in which he actually uses the same trick, which he's got to give these tuberculin testings. These are like real stories of vet, amazing stories. And that's what they did. They took all of the agalim, they put them into a barn, locked the door, and the kids all got scared, and they started making a bunch of noise. The mothers saw them look up, and from all 400 acres, they come and running, and that was it. And so what will I do? I'll take the egel down. Here's the door. I'll take the egel down, and everyone will come running for the egel. So that way we'll get everybody down to Mitzrayim. Okay, this of course becomes the same idea which the word expresses. It's time for the Ger Yezaracha. It's been Migurei. It's been 259 years. And that it's a sort of nasty way to treat Yaakov Avinu, you would say. But it brings out very strongly the sense of nobody understanding what's happening. When we talk about Dotan, the Medrash says, Dotan equals 470, because what Gabriel was saying is, you can go looking for your brothers. I just want you to know something. It's going to be 470 years until you get back here. That's exactly how long it takes. You add up until you get back here. You want to come back here again? See you in 470 years. To the day. Because you have the years of Yosef until the Golus Mitzrayim begins, 400 years in Mitzrayim, and then you have 40 years in the Midbar, and it was 470. So you come into Eretz Yisrael again, you can come back to Dothan. I hope you have the patience. Or 470, you know what you're getting into. You're getting into two separate sets of Goliot. One of them is 400 years in Mitzrayim, the other is 70 years in Babel. They're all going to come from this little trip to Dothan. Have a good time. So that the idea of the Bishvil Shnei Slaim Shel Milat, $2 worth of fancy material that Yaakov gave, that changed everything, brings this out so powerfully. And everything that takes place makes that definition of Yisrael so different. And because of that, the vast display of history that emerges from it seems to be impossible to understand from the point of view of the people involved. They come across as almost chess pieces instead of people, instead of recognizing what they're doing. And somehow that must have something to do with the entire idea of the chosher that we're talking about here. And the truth is, take a look at the words, Vayeshev Yaakov Eretz Migurei Aviv. And then we go to Eila Toldot. What exactly is the meaning of Eila Toldot? Because all it says is Eila Toldot Yaakov. You're nice to say, Malamed, that this is the Iker Toldot of Yaakov is in terms of Yosef, but it certainly doesn't explain how we could possibly call this a sentence, Eila Toldot Yaakov. The other attempt that Chazal tried to make to explain that as Yosef was kolel all of the various issues of the Shvatim, so that he had the Bechorah of Reuven, and he had the Malchus of Yehuda, and he had the Bina of Yisachar, and so on and so forth. But also, as Rashi says, there's all very nice midrashim. What would be the meaning of the word? So remember that the opening Rashi describes this parsha as being the parallel to the closing of the previous parsha, which is, of course, the remez in the Natati Esav which means, says Rashi, he brings the medrash, marshal to someone who lost a diamond in the sand. So there's a diamond in the sand. What you do is you bring a sieve and you pour all the sand through it, And as soon as you find your diamond, you throw the rest away, and all you're interested in is your beautiful diamond. Which is exactly what happens here. We just went through all of these different generations, the Lachim, the Chori, the Seir, and what the relationship is to Esav, but that was only in order to finally get to the moment where we could deal with the Margalit, and the Margalit, now we're going to talk about the Margalit. Okay, therefore, Rashi understands Ela Toldot to mean this is the parallel. Those were the Toldot. Now we're going to begin discussing the Toldot of Yaakov B'Rechavat. Now we're going to start expanding on it. Okay, so when I say Ela Toldot Yaakov, what I really mean, says Rashi, Ela Shel Toldot Yaakov, Korotehem, and so on and so forth. The Ramban, apparently, according to Mizrahi, misunderstands Rashi's intent. Well, others give for teretz. It doesn't mean that he has to necessarily misunderstand it. And thinks that Rashi, or seems to think that Rashi is saying that the meaning of the word Toldot is the Korotehem, Milchamotehem, and so on. And that idea of Korotayamim, the Radak holds that is the meaning of Toldot. But Ezra also that's the meaning of Toldot. But in general, the Ramban is literally against that approach. And here too, he says to Rashi, that's crazy. Since when does Toldot mean Milchamot and Nidudayim? How can it mean that? Because it was not what Rashi was saying. Rashi is simply saying the meaning of this parsha is the opening up of the story of how it is that Yaakov Avanav Yardu Mitzrayim, which is the end of the parsha, of course, the way in which this is going to be how we get this down entirely. So it's all sort of after the Kitzur Dimratz. When now the Vayeshev Yaakov means that in order for there to be a yeshiva, this is the way that it has to take place. In which case, it means that the perfect moment of the Koach Ma'aseh V'Gid La'amo, the moment of the transition which closes this book, is so beautifully brought out by the Ramban because he says the only possible meaning to Ela Toldot is that it's referring to the end of the whole story. The Shivim Nefesh Yordu Mitzrayim. So Ela Toldot Yaakov, okay, let's start with Yosef, and then what? And then the closing words of the book, and the rest of the Toldot. And then now you know everything that happened. Which means that basically we're running from here, this Vayeshev Yaakov, in order to be able to answer. But how did we end up with the next stage? Which means that Sefer Bereshit, in terms of the Korban, you need to know. Now we enter the next stage. The next stage is the akrit of the Ema Chashecha Gedola, and the rest of history plays out whatever was invested up until this point. And that means from the beginning of Vayeshev, this is where we're going. And that's it. And that's exactly what we do in the Haggadah Shel Pesach. That Haggadah Shel Pesach being itself Koach Ma'asav Higid. It's the only other place where we have Higid for the point of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is the other Higid. There's three Higids. That's the Koach Ma'asav Higid La'amo. And that's the Higadet Ayom L'Hashem Elokecha Kibati El Haaretz. And that's the Higadet Elavincha B'Yom L'Leimo. So it's those three issues are all the Haggadah Shel Pesach, and here with the next stage opening up. So obviously it's a very powerful description of the original Bereshis, B'Shvil Yisor Shenikra Bereshis, which needs to be the full expression of that Koach Ma'asav Higid La'amo, which is very strange because it seems to be over here that everybody has lost their way. If according to the Ramban, the meaning of the Koach Ma'asav Higid La'amo is that it is possible to see the development of the type of human being for which HaKadosh Baruch Hu would want to create a world and would therefore be understood and vindicated in providing Eretz Yisrael for that very special type of human being, almost a new species of human. This certainly doesn't seem to be the best possible expression of that idea. So that, I mean, the first part of Bereshit is all very nice. There seems to be a universal appreciation of, what it is that B'nai Yisrael stand for. But at this point, things certainly seem to be going downhill. And yet here it's all part of Yeshivat Yaakov and all part of the flow, which starts to look good with Yosef, and then even the one guy who seems to know what he was doing, which is Yosef, ends up being thrown once again into prison until we get to Miketz. Why? Because he doesn't really know exactly what he's doing, apparently. Tries to use his own devices. So let us try to understand the core of all of this. Where does it come from? Where did the story begin? And what is the meaning of the elements of the story that reach a tikkun here in Vayeshev? Remember that the klal of this entire story starts with a massive change in Yaakov Avinu himself. It was the beginning of this change. What we're talking about seems to be a downhill descent into darkness. It actually begins with darkness. It begins when Yaakov Avinu is left alone in the dark. It's in the middle of the night. Vayivater Yaakov levado. And something changes in this fight with the Malach. And basically, it affects him in such a way that he's tzolea al yerecho, and all of the initial confidence that he had turns into a constant sense of fear of Shema Yigrom Achet. I'm going to end up doing the kind of things that I don't want to do. He becomes the Seir HaMishtaleach and all of the Korbanos of Yom Kippurim and things which the Medrash says, why? Why were you doing all of this? What did you think made it necessary to act in this fashion? Now, it's clear that the change was triggered by that very powerful event. That was by the change in how it was that the Gid HaNasheh affected him. We know, according to the Zohar, that effect is the source of the Churban, which means that it's the source of all the Kilkulim and the Yerida L'Galut. As the Zohar puts it, there are Shin Samachet Mitzvot Lo Ta'aseh, one for each day of the year, the solar year, including the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. And the day that is Mechuvan Keneged the Gid HaNasheh is Tisha B'Av. And that when it says over here, after the Mechirat Yosef, it says that they were Vayeshvu ve'echol v'lishtot. That was when it says et Yosef, it's referring to, it's not only that they were ochel v'shoteh, then it says if they were ochel v'shoteh on Tisha B'Av, and kol ochel v'shoteh b'Tisha B'Av, it's as if they ate the Gid HaNasheh. Weird. Not only that, but another strange, is Gemara, that when they came down in next week's parsha and they meet Yosef and they're brought in for the Seudah, so the Gemara says that Yosef specifically tells his son, make sure that you take the Gid HaNasheh out in front of them when you're going to feed them, so that they should know that there's no Gid HaNasheh there. It's really, really weird. And whatever that change is, we do understand that the simple meaning of the Gid HaNasheh, even in terms of language, even in terms of modern Hebrew, that the idea, as the Zohar puts it, the capability of standing up on the earth, ultimately means the way in which the translation of your ideas become real. Of course, is everything that we've been talking about. How do you translate the ideas, the dreams, what it was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in store, so to speak? How do you make that part through the ma'asim of a Navi, let's say? And how do you make that part of life? In terms of human activity, it's an amazing insight of the Zohar. Essentially, is expressed in the Gemara that the idea is, as Yehuda put it, how do we make money off of this? Ma betza kinarok et achinu. Ma mamon. Where is the money? And that sounds crazy, but none of you understand that the bottom line, almost by definition, bottom line means cash. And that's exactly what Yaakov Avinu was mitaken when he came to Shem. Cash. No more barter. This universal idea of translating things into the power to act upon the world. Cash. And therefore, when we talk about bankruptcy, we talk about pshitat regal. Pshitat regal is exactly what a tzoleya is all about. You cannot stand on your own. You cannot stand on your own, then you will have broken down in your ability to be connected to the world as it is. And that's why we really view the translation of an idea into Olam Hazeh as requiring a market that proves the marketability and viability of the idea, which is why it becomes so important in terms of the Taina of Esav Latilov. The Gemara says, there's Monty Python says, quoting the Gemara, that the idea of what it is, what did the Romans ever do for us? So in terms of the Gemara, what the Romans did for us was the development of markets. Forget about the roads. There's not so much of the Gemara. The aqueducts, yeah. Right. But the important thing is the cash, right? In the end, it's Wall Street. And this, as the Zohar puts it, is the problem of Tomchei Orayta. People will stop having a type of connection to Torah which will allow them to support it. There's no support. And that leads to Yaakov Avinu's collapse. Obviously, in the deepest sense, what we're talking about is something cracks in Yaakov's ability to, the very thing that happens at that moment is, of course, his recognition and his achieving the change of name to Yisrael, which doesn't completely take place. So that in terms of his Yaakov orientation, his local personality, his ability to translate at that point the ideas of what it means to be Yisrael into what it means to be a human being in Olam Hazeh, that effectively utilizes those ideas, is ruined by the Gid Anosh. And every one of us feels that suffering to the depth of one's being. Because all of us have the most wonderful ideas, the most wonderful commitments, and the most amazing thoughts and philosophies and so on. But when it comes to the translation of the actual functioning, you find yourself taking the same absurd paths of the Shvatim, in which your psychology takes over, your habits take over, and your physical needs take over, and everything becomes ruined because there's this disconnect that doesn't make it possible for you to actually experientially live the life that you think that you want to live and that you are living, at least when you don't have to see anybody else, you don't have to look at yourself in the mirror. This is exactly the life I want. Such a shame there's other people around. But that is a Gid Anosh problem. And obviously all the issues that we have afterwards of the losses that bring us to a churban, of course, are going to be Gid Anosh oriented. Which means that the close of that period of Yaakov Avinu's life, the Vayivater Yaakov levado, which according to the Medrash becomes V'nisgav Hashem levado b'yom hahu. That levado involves the confrontation with himself, as the Medrash and many of the Mefarshim explain, that ultimately the Ish, according to the Tanakh of Eliyahu, the Ish with whom he fights is Yisrael. And it's his own need to be able to find himself within that Yisrael. And that means that the tikkun to the Gid Anosha, it truly only happens through final Geula itself. And therefore the Vayeshev Le'echol is essentially eating. That's why it says, the way that nobody understands why the Gemara is saying this. It says, Davar, this is the Gemara. So Davar shalach b'Yaakov v'nafal b'Yisrael. So what is that? Davar shalach b'Yaakov ze Gid Anosh, which was Nokia, Yaakov Avinu's personal experience of what he was doing. V'nafal b'Yisrael. But that created this nefila throughout Yisrael, the B'nai Yisrael. So that means that it's dafka, this interrelationship, the first time that we see this interrelationship, in which something is problematic for Yaakov, that becomes okay lo yochlu b'nei Yisrael, et gidan Hashem, which I mean, there were so many other things, but this is the point that went immediately into effect, which is the sense, oh my God, this is all of our futures that is attacked at that moment. There's an amazing, of course, it's today's word of the day in Merriam-Webster, of a word whose etymology they have no idea. It says the etymology of this word is shrouded in mystery, they say. And it's so obvious what the word is. That word is jackleg. Jackleg means somebody who is incompetent to get his ideas into action. Right? It's Yaakov's leg, in the sense of, what is that? And it's most often used for preachers and lawyers. Some jackleg preacher. It's certainly a lawyer. Oh, that's amazing. Mamish today's words. Incredible. So, I mean, just as we were talking before, that the idea of Yerushas Aretz that we spoke about revolves around the Nevi'as. We thought were mere metaphors, and Ramban points out that they actually change the nature of physical reality. That they're so vitally important because they're the first stop of a translation of a creative vision into Olam Hazeh. Obviously, the most primal vision is creation itself. And in fact, that idea of Niskav, Hashem Levado, which is the equivalent of Vayivater Yaakov Levado, is an actual Kavayochel problem in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Gid HaNoshes, so to speak. It's exactly the same problem. The Maisa Bereshis that is searching for the Shvil Yisrael Shenikra Reshis, that is attempting to find the Adam that can satisfy the question of the Malachim, or satisfy HaKadosh Baruch Hu's question. Na'aseh Adam B'Tzalmenu, which is an open question, which can only be answered by the achievement which is there. I can't tell you, it cannot be a statement, Yehi Adam, because Adam obviously is not Adam unless he becomes Adam. So what am I supposed to say? So we have here an idea that I need to translate into reality. The way that the Gemara puts it is that Rashi actually brings this. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not called Elokei HaAretz. He's Elokei HaShamayim. He only becomes Elokei HaAretz after the beginning of Toldos HaShamayim V'Aretz Behi Baram, because it's Avram Avinu who says, so Rashi brings with the discussion with Eliezer and Avram, that originally HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Kivayochel Elokei HaShamayim, and through me he becomes Elokei HaAretz, and therefore Yishlach Malach Lefanech. Obviously, that's the meaning of the Malach. The Malach is the translator, the Malach is the effectuator. And it's so long as something is broken, then that Malach comes across as a voice that's coming from off stage. That's exactly the point. Mimeni. You have to say Mimeni. That's evident. That's you. What do you mean, Mimeni? The very breakdown in the sense that we have, that there's some planner, there's something that is coming down as a machine, is just, it's outrageous. And it points to exactly this breakdown that we always call disembodied malachim who do not have a real place in terms of connecting the earth. This is the most powerful breakdown in the vision that Yaakov originally had of himself, which is the Sulam. So that Sulam showed a continuum of Olim and Yardim, and it seemed to be that everything was just going to be great. And that was his vision of the Beis HaMikdash. And this is going to be the best for his the breakdown, and so too does HaKadosh Baruch Hu have the same problem. So what do I do with this Adam that I created that cannot seem to get it together, so to speak? And there's nothing that I can do to push him to make that happen. And we know that tikkun ultimately is a tikkun of a joint holiday which generally we do not understand how much it's a joint holiday, and that is the joint holiday of Purim and Hanukkah. And that joint holiday, the reason I say it's a joint holiday is not only because Kabbalistically, Netzach v'Hod represent the two raglayim that address the breakdown of the Gid HaNashim, and it's in terms of Kabbalah. But in terms of the way that the Torah presents these holidays, if you take a look at Zechariah, you take a look at Nero Zechariah, it starts with Zerubbabel, which is the first step of Koresh at the coming to Beis Hamikdash that wasn't able to be completed. Goes through Ezra, Nehemiah, who understands himself. Unbelievably. This is Mishnat Shtayim La Tachshat. This is the first stage, which becomes that Mishnat Shtayim, which he rebuilds, sends out the first rebuilding of Beis Hamikdash, turns into Nehemiah in the 12th year, who then goes down to complete it. And he says, Vani b'Shushan HaBira, taking, and he, of course, is the son of Esther himself, of Esther herself, Esther Achashverosh. And this becomes, in the second Beis Hamikdash, after it's finally completed, this becomes the Neirot of Zechariah, which is his vision, of Chenla, which is what we're going to read as the Haftorah for Shabbos Chanukah. And it goes directly from the beginning vision, which is why Nehemiah ends up talking as if he's Esther. Vani b'Shushan HaBira. And that Shushan says the same words. Imal HaMelech Tov, V'im Tov Ani Beinav, and so all those things. He takes the approach of Esther, acts almost as if he is Esther, and then when we rebuild Beit HaMikdash, we end up at the time of Hurdas. And at the time of Hanukkah, we end up with Sha'ar Shoshan. Why Sha'ar Shoshan? People need to remember where this all comes from. Shedu Mi'ayin Bo. It's wild. Those are the two holidays that are essentially the tikkun of that. And during this period, all that we find here is HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Ani El Shaddai. And remember that Ani El Shaddai means I don't do things. I determine when they have been done. So Ani El Shaddai means Ani Hu Shamarti Lo Lami Dai. So you're living in a particular slice of space-time in an expanding universe. So as the Gemara says, the universe was continuing to expand endlessly. This is the point that we begin. And therefore we start counting creation as if it were at that point. So fine. So that point of 13.7 billion years and so on becomes the point of Rashis in which things make a difference. Here's where it starts. Here's where the output begins. Here's where the vindication begins. Fine. Then in terms of the split second of 6,000 years of vindication, to us it seems like, a while. But even in the perspective of looking back over the brief history of Klal Yisrael, looking back over the brief history of civilization, and it's utterly shocking. It's literally utterly shocking to think about a species that climbs up out of nowhere just 10,000 or so years ago and to become space travelers. And it's wild. Total primitive hairy apes that are building rocket ships and traveling and sending robots throughout their solar system and beyond. In 100 years to go from a little one-engine airplane to visiting Pluto, that's one human lifetime, for God's sake. There are people walking around that remember that. It's just beyond belief. Of course, it's a flash in time in which the vindication comes now. It's an absolutely astonishing kind of idea. And so all the things, the distance that we need to go from the Vayevater Levado, that distance that we cover between Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso, which is the 24 Otiyot, and Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is the Chafei Otiyot, that distance is this distance. It's the distance between achieving the unification of the vision of what it means to say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and to be mechaber with the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, which is Malchus in the place of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Olam, and therefore, as the Zohar says, that is the first 24 days of Kislev, and the 25th day of Kislev is the Bekia of the Or of that Chibur. It means that exactly the time that we're involved in is this time itself that comes to address this particular issue, so that we find even in this week's Parsha, the most amazing story, is part of the very beginning. All along it's Yaakov and his relationship to Yosef. All of a sudden, we have a very strange change. Something that seems inexplicable for a father that loves his child so much and is so careful to make sure that nothing should chas v'sholom happen to him. So what do we find here? It really brings out this whole idea so beautifully. So it talks about how they hated him and everything. Come to Yaakov, what's going on? This is what's going on. All of a sudden, all of a sudden, Yaakov disappears. Vayomer Yisrael of Yosef. Now, all of a sudden, it's Yisrael speaking to Yosef. And, I mean, the two psukim make absolutely no sense. Halo achecha ro'im b'Hashem. Is it not true that your brothers are at Shem? What does that have to do with it? You need something done. Is it not true? Go ahead, and I'll go ahead means, I mean, first I'll send you, then you go ahead, right? No. And Yosef says, Hineni, which sounds like, okay, I'm off, see you later, Dad. Vayomer lo, so Yisrael says to him, okay, how about going? Didn't we just talk about that, Dad? Or is something wrong? Did I miss the point? It's an amazing story. So what is happening over here? Even the absolute shot. There's no other way to read the puzzle. This is the situation. You had a problem with those brothers. I have an idea. But that idea requires your commitment to making it happen. Lecha, that's always what lecha means. Lecha is always the sense of, let's do something. Okay, we're going to do it. Lecha, what I'd like to do with you is I'd like to send you. So obviously this was a point in which he wants Yosef to be mitaken the problems. Vayomer lo hineni, I'm in. Good. Okay, so now I'm going to do it. Okay? You understand? You agreed that I'm going to send you? Okay, here I go. I'm sending you. I mean, it's unbelievable. So there's this profound sense on everybody's part of, look, we need to have a sense of what we're going to achieve and how it is that we're going to achieve it. And it's an amazing story. How is it that I'm going to achieve it? Here it's sends down completely unprotected. He knows what this could mean to him. And the measure says that for the next 22 years, he was killing himself. How could I have done that? How did I send him down unprotected, right? You just watched in the IMAX. You watched Bond. You know what happens in Bond. The Bond has to get this information. He needs to get information out of a guy who doesn't trust a friend. He needs to find out where this guy's daughter is. Where if she's exposed, she's dead. So he tells this guy, I'm going to protect her. As a matter of fact, it's the only chance you have is I'm going to protect her. You have my word. Guy looks at him, your word. He takes out his gun, gives it to the other guy. That's my word. Leaving himself totally defenseless. That's my word. You want to kill me? Yeah, you kill me. It's exactly what's happening here. You have all these crazy ideas. We have our plans. I'm trying to influence you. This is something that's coming from me. Here's my gun. I'm completely alone. I'm totally defenseless. If you think that my initial sharing of those dreams with you was not an act of profound vulnerability, this proves it, okay? And if it doesn't prove it, so shoot me, which they probably do. But the point is that it's the only possible way to attempt to deal with the issue. And it's Yisrael. What are you looking at? What's not good?
No, I'm just thinking.
Okay.
It's so obnoxious what Yosef does.
It's not obnoxious if you understand where it's coming from And that it's total vulnerability. This is exactly what Yisroel is doing. Why is Yisroel doing this? Because he says, look, what's happened until now is that these guys don't understand where this is coming from, you understand? They think that this has to do with something personal. So that's what has to be dealt with. That's always been my problem at dealing with them. Now I'm coming as Yisroel. If we're ready to deal with them, it can't be personal if it's Yisroel. It's the nature of the world. It's the nature of creation. If they could only see that, then the reaction would be, that's an amazing thing. What can we do to make this happen? Which, of course, is exactly what they do in the end. It's exactly what they do in the end. Because here's Yehuda coming down, yelling at Yosef, are you crazy? Do you understand what this boy means to his father? How could you possibly suggest such a thing? I'll stay here. Send him back. And Yosef says, yeah, that's a very good point, but why don't you just tell your dad, you'll get over it. I mean, it's just this personal love affair you've got with some kid's mother or something. I mean, people die all the time. I mean, you get over it, old man. What's the big deal? You could just tell your father the same thing you thought all along. So, we kicked the bucket. So there went Yosef, and the string just followed the bucket down. That's Binyamin. What's the big deal? I understand. Because that's exactly the point. Until now you said, okay, you think that the Shvatim, after they saw what Yaakov Avinu was going through, that they wouldn't do whatever was in their power to change it? They wouldn't have all said, Vani ana ani ba? So how could they possibly have done something so insane? Because that's exactly it. Our father's he's a little bit over romantic. He's got this hang up with this girl, Rachel, that was crazy. Then they had this kid, a wild kid, but he thinks he's the world's gift, He'll get over it. Believe me, he'll get over it. People that have those kind of an over-intense relationships, they figure out, I don't know what I was thinking.
Or they pay a price.
It'll take him a year or two, but he'll be fine. Okay, so this is why it's Yisroel, and this is the first "it's from me" that appears in the parsha, which is Vayeshev mi emek Hebron, from the Eitzah Amuka of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's beloved lover himself, and he says, my beautiful lover, referring to Avram Avinu, buried in Emek Hebron. Hebron's not in an Emek, exactly. It's in a har. But the Emek Hebron is the depth of the thoughts, the depth of the planning, the profundity of what was there, the idea of Ger Yezaracha, exactly this. And that recognition of where this could lead, which is the Dotan and all of the understandings of the 470 years and the different Goliot and so on and so on, is all built into the acceptance of that shlichut initially. If this goes sour, we go south. And basically, it was a commitment to do whatever last possible things you can do to make it clear that this is reality. It's not about me. And therefore, you want in, not out.
How can you present vulnerability if you have the Kibatam Ra'ah?
That's what their train is. But what the heck is wrong with the Bara'ah if you're concerned? I don't understand. The people, it's like the Gemara that talks about the Talmud that talks to the Rebbe about what the other Talmud did. Right? So if, that's what the Gemara says, is that considered to be Lashon Hara or not? So if you know that your words are accepted by the Rav as if you were 2-8, and then it's not considered to be Lashon Hara, because the only thing that you want to do is to be able to provide a tikkun for them. So again, let's say you were dealing with a friend, right?
Is that part of the vulnerability?
Of course. Exactly. I'll do whatever needs to be done. I'm in this body, soul, emotions, everything. Because everything that you do matters and everything that I do matters. And whatever it's going to, I don't care. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu saying, I am the world's greatest honor. That's true. Yeah, of course it's true. So what if it's true? So you guys do all kinds of horrible things. That's true. So what? It has nothing to do with me and you. At least that's what it's meant to be. We'll see where the Pagam is and what goes wrong. But this is what it's meant to be, and this is what Yisroel wants it to be. Right. Exactly. You think my father loves me and that he would do anything to protect me. And can you explain why he's sending me to you to get killed? And why I'm ready to come here without any kind of protection? And when a malach warns me that my so-called brothers are a bunch of bastards, that it doesn't matter and I'm coming anyway, and that they aren't brothers, they're murderers, I don't believe that they're murderers. And so on, okay? I mean, obviously it was a tremendously powerful moment, and to some extent it led to Yehuda's understanding of Ma'abetza. So if we can't translate this into something real in the world, then what is the point? What are we doing? That's the, it sounds like a purely cynical thing. We're going to make any money off of the sale or not? But obviously, there's the essence of the idea. And the tikkun to all of this can only lie in the very things that are so disturbing about the Parsha. The things that disturb us about the Parsha is that it just doesn't seem possible. We're talking about the entire future of Klal Yisrael, the leadership of people that are capable of being mashpia, the shechina, to be mitzaref to their best. I mean, what are we talking about over here? 2-year-olds? Jealousies? And then, I mean, all of look, there's one word that I think describes the Parsha beautifully. It is raw. Just plain raw. Raw in the simple modern sense of sexually raw. We use that word in that sense too. So Gemara's question is whether we should even read the Parsha publicly. I understand. The kids are sitting there listening at shul. What are they listening to? Masturbation they're listening to. Whorehouses they're listening to. The heads of the Ummah. What are kids supposed to think about this Parsha? We have to record these things. Should we say it in public? And then maybe we should be chayish for Yikra the Yehuda and so on, as the Gemara says. It's raw. It's just ridiculously raw. And the emotions, we use that same word for emotions, raw emotions, unsophisticated, down at the very, very bottom of the ladder of reptilian brains with all of the competitive elements, with pure Freudian issues that keep coming out in the relationship of my father to his mother, the relationship of my father to the other mother, and the B'nai Ashvatim, and how Ashvachais, and how it is that we relate to them, and so on and so forth. What kind of business is this? The type of stuff that you read about in these psychology books about family order and so on. This is what the Torah is about. Obviously, if we're talking about the very elements that translate the concept of Yisrael into the lowest of the low, then it's going to be in terms of rawness, because that is what we stand upon. That's what makes us ourselves, and that is what ultimately needs to be reflective of the ideas that we have that are our Yisrael ideas. And that's why specifically in this Parsha, we begin with the very nature of the tikkunim that end up with a complete and total integration of those issues that are so raw that on the surface they're pure erva oriented. The relationship of David, the relationship of Ruth and Boaz and Avishag Shunamit, and the problems with the continued malchus with Bathsheba, all raw questions that bother people no end. And here that tikkun that has to come even in the giving over of the malchus, contrasting the elements of Yetzer that were involved with Bathsheba at the moment of the Messiah of the malchus to Shlomo, with the relationship to Avishag Shunamit that is absolutely and totally sensual, and yet lacks any Darwinian element that would take things out of control, such that Avishag was certain that David is impotent. And he has to prove to her that he's not impotent, because that itself is part of the entire idea of the entire sugya of the complete integration. And this becomes the vision, as the Zohar says, of Yetzer Lativ Lavo. You think it's a coincidence that the Makor of the Malchus is called Pritzutz? Peretz is the simon of the Malchus. If it comes from Peretz, then for sure it's going to be he's going to be the Melech. This is what Doeg had to find out for Shlomo, for Shaul. Find out whether it comes from Peretz or Zerach, because Peretz is for sure going to be a Melech. Yeah, you think it's a coincidence that exactly the same issues come up with the other Mashiach Hashem that Yaakov Avinu thought was actually going to achieve a Yeshua, which is Shimshon. And then the Yeshua Kiviti Hashem is that Gam Zeh Yamut. But it's coming so close, and it's always so close, and yet that one little issue will always throw it off. And this is, by the way, so powerful that Chazal say the Ketonet Pasim was called Ketonet Pasim al Shem, the strangest thing. Potiphar, Socharim, Yishmaelim, and Midyanim. Pasim. It's only one small issue, which is that the Ketonet Pasim wasn't even on him. They had stripped him by Avshita, Ketonet Pasim. So it wasn't even part of that story. So why the heck would the Ketonet Pasim possibly be merames to those stories of the events that took place on him? And what would it have to do with the Ketonet Pasim? And that points to another astonishing thing. So Yaakov Avinu is growing a dandy in his home? A kid who's sitting around putting on eyeshadow? Misalsa Basaro, and he's being metaken enough? Yaakov Avinu isn't able to, listen here, my son, there are things more important. I mean, we don't want you ending up, in the red light district over here. Not only does he not do that, but he gives him the Ketonet Pasim. The Ketonet Pasim is only, Banana Republic shirts. The Ketonet Pasim is like the ultimate, we say in modern Hebrew, it's a simpas. You have an idea like where things are going to completely get out of control. The Ketonet Pasim is what turned him into exactly what he became in Mitzrayim, a sexual symbol, right, in which the Banot Zadot al Ashur was pointed out that's like the English expression, the girls are crawling up the wall. It literally is a translation of that pasuk. This is what he becomes in Mitzrayim. The reason that it's the mocker for the 4 sales is because Yosef was not being sold for diamond polishing. It was being sold for sex. As Rashi says, that's the idea of Potiphar. You think the end result wasn't every single sale? Wasn't raising the price of his fabulous sex slave? Obviously, that's his value. So if that's the case, the Ketonet Pasim was Yaakov Avinu's own throwing Yosef into a position where these sales could happen. This is what the brothers took advantage of, which is basically throwing it in his face. Hakerna, Look familiar? Hakerna has that double meaning. She also says Hakerna. To him, that's one of the strange, you don't know what you're doing, So Tamar says to him, Hakerna, please. But the Hakerna over there says, Hakerna Baracha? Be merachim. You want me to be killed for nothing. Hakerna. And it's Hakerna also isn't the first Hakerna. You think it's a coincidence? And indeed it wasn't a coincidence. In the end, was because of these issues that appear later on. They're all interrelated issues. So the Eila Toldot Yaakov Yosef is specifically because the first stage of the translation of ideas into nature is essentially the ideas of Yesod. It's what Goyim call sexuality, but which to us is exactly the opposite. It's the drive for total chibur with the universe. It's that midah of Yesod around which our entire personality of Brit Milah and the essence of Yisrael is formed. And therefore the relationship of Tiferes, the Yesod, to Malchus is the essential Amud Emtsoi of the Midas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's the first thing that Yaakov Avinu identifies. This is the relationship of Eila Dodot, Yaakov, Yosef. Yosef is doing it for him. So I am on that Yaakov Darga that never interrelated with that level of the world. You have to be me. And that's the Zivikunon. Everything is the same. Ko Masha Karali Yaakov, Karali Yosef. They become, this is what the Shvatim needed to know, it wasn't a crazy old man with an infatuation for a girl that he lost. It was a vision from the instant he saw her of the Bechia, of not being buried with her, of understanding the Golos that was to come, of understanding what Kever Rochel meant, and what the Kober Aman Nishma meant, and all of that issue. This is a person that you say, oh, he'll get over it. It's same. And it takes them that time to see its reality until they finally say exactly those words to Yosef himself later on. And so that means his life, Yaakov Avinu's, broke down. The first thing that he was capable of doing on that level were the Pachim Ketani. And after that, as the Haftorah, we're going to read in the Haftorah, Mibaz liyom ktanot. Mibaz liyom ktanot. People make fun. And this is a reference to the Beis HaMikdash. It's Rubavel. Everybody was crying. This is a Beis HaMikdash, piece of garbage. Yeah, it's exactly all these things. It's all garbage. It's all rawness. It's all garbage. It's all stupid. It's all things. I don't have time for psychiatrists. I'm not going to talk about these. Forget about it. Who needs to deal with this? Bikesh Yaakov Vayeshev B'Shalva. Who needs to deal with this? I don't want to deal with this. That's exactly what the Bikesh Vayeshev B'Shalva means. I don't want to deal with this garbage. Mi baz liyom ktanot. You start off speaking about Pachim Kitanim. Oh, it's easy to handle the understanding that I need to take care of every last detail in my life. The floors need to be clean. The laundry needs to be done. I need to get the dishes out of the sink. I'm not buzzed to that. I understand that life consists of doing all kinds of little things, but not dealing with garbage in the mind. Certainly not garbage in the mind of others. Certainly not people that I could expect more of. This I break down in, because the deepest sense of the Giranasha, what it needs to deal with, is exactly that. And it's any element that is chaser in Yaakov Avinu himself, which is expressed in his inability to keep his neder, and in the delays that he takes, and in the fears that he experiences, and in his distancing from the events of his children, of his not understanding Rachel, and his not understanding Leah, and his being unable to close the distance between them and between us. So those are things that are in him. Vaharaya, each one of these children is named by the mothers in terms of the problem of their relationship with him. And so therefore, obviously, in the end, it's a breakdown of the relationship to him in Shem, the way that they treat Yaakov. All of that is what he needs to deal with. In the Vayivater Yaakov Levado, the only thing left for you to deal with Yaakov is Yaakov. Vayivater Yaakov Levado. That's the problem right now. That's what you have to deal with. And as you deal with that, and as you change with the world changes with you. Remember that that's the way the whole story begins. But that's exactly the point. Each change in the aura that's mizgala inside of the person changes the environment of what it is that he's invested in, such that haba'im yashreish Yaakov, which are the ba'im at the end of the Shiva Nafesh, contain all of the shorashim that are put there by Yaakov Avinu. Yatzitz v'yifrach Yisrael, they blossom from Yaakov into Yisrael, exactly what we're talking about. What a beautiful pasuk. Blossom. Umala kol haaretz t'nuva. Creativity, productivity. The entire earth becomes filled with that productivity. Exactly what was missing in the Giranasha. So this is the challenge that takes place in this parsha, such that the very fact, even if something is a small, unnecessary hint to the Sarah Mashkim, becomes a vision of what the future is. And anything that is unnecessary is unreal. Did you, Yosef, have to say, Ki im zechartani? Did it serve a purpose? What purpose did it serve in reality? Tell me. Could he have remembered you? Of course. Whether it would be beneficial for Paro at whatever point that would happen, obviously it was in his benefit to remember it. If I ask you to remember me, have I raised the chances that you remember me exactly? Or have I made it even worse? But most importantly, beautiful medrash that defines the problem. Marshal to a melech. Okay, so this melech has eminent domain. He takes over somebody's car. We're gonna be taking a break in just 3 minutes. So he takes over somebody's car. Okay, the deal is usually you take the car, it's used for whatever purposes the malchus needs it, and then it's returned to you. This guy, he doesn't get any word from the authorities about his car. He's going crazy, can't get home every day from work. He sends multiple letters to the Melech, my beloved king, and I'm so happy you were able to use my car. It means so much to me. And if there's any way that you could return the car now, if you don't need it, it would be such a help for me. Doesn't get any answer. So he decides to take the regular route, Protectia. So he finds out who's working in the office of cars for the Melech, makes friends with the guy, buys him some gifts, and says, listen, my car has been stuck there, maybe you could get it out, we can get some more gifts, Anyway, the Melech gets wind of the fact that he did this and sends him a letter. I was going to send your car back with some beautiful gifts in it next week. How about we wait a couple of years, huh? That's exactly what happens over here to Yosef. All right, wait, I want to say goodnight to everybody. So we're going to take a break right now, maybe for Arvit. Maybe we have a minute for Arvit even. We'll take a break and we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you.